I thought I understood end-of-life care. Hospice nursing teaches you that death is not an enemy, but a process. We comfort, we medicate, we guide families through the slow decline of someone they love. It's never easy, but over time you learn rhythms, signs, the subtle changes that whisper, "It's almost time." But nothing in my training prepared me for Mr. Alton Reeve. It was the spring of 2014 when he was admitted to St. Catherine's Hospice House in upstate New York, a converted Victorian mansion that had been turned into a facility for patients who needed comfort in their final days. The halls smelled faintly of lavender oil and antiseptic. The walls were painted soft blue, meant to soothe. Most of our patients stayed only a few weeks, sometimes days. Mr. Reeve was 74, a retired accountant from Buffalo. Lung cancer had eaten him down to skin and bone. He arrived in a wheelchair pushed by his daughter Emily, who looked exhausted but determined. She told me he'd refused further chemotherapy after his last hospitalization. "He just wants peace," she whispered, eyes wet. When I greeted him, he reached for my hand with startling strength. His grip was dry but firm. His eyes pale, almost silver in the sunlight, locked onto mine. "You're the night nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, though I hadn't introduced myself yet. That first night, I checked on him every hour. He declined pain meds, saying he preferred a clear head. At 2:15 a.m., I found him sitting upright in bed, wide awake, staring at the open doorway. "She'll be gone by morning," he said. I followed his gaze to room 3, across the hall. Inside, Mrs. Daniels, an 80-year-old with congestive heart failure, slept peacefully. Her breathing was steady, pulse stable. There was no sign of imminent decline. I asked what he meant. Mr. Reeves smiled faintly. "You'll see." I left unsettled but chalked it up to delirium. Dying patients often said strange things. But when I returned at dawn, I found the hallway crowded, family members weeping, staff whispering. Mrs. Daniels had passed at 5:43 a.m. in her sleep. No distress, no warning, peaceful, but unexpected. As I stood in her doorway, trying to process it, I glanced back. Mr. Reeve was watching from his bed, eyes bright, lips curled in the faintest smile. When I entered his room later, he spoke before I could. "You'll understand soon," he said softly. "I don't just see my own ending, I see everyone's." I told myself it was coincidence. A lucky guess, nothing more. But deep down, a knot tightened in my stomach. Because as his words echoed in my head, I realized one thing. He hadn't sounded surprised. He'd sounded certain. Hospice nurses aren't strangers to strange words. Hallucinations, deathbed visions, whispers to unseen loved ones, it's part of the process. We comfort families, remind them it's normal. But nothing about Mr. Reeves' calm certainty felt like confusion. 2 nights after Mrs. Daniels passed, I found him awake again at 2 a.m., sitting perfectly still in the dim light of his bedside lamp. His daughter Emily slept curled up in a recliner nearby. He raised a finger to his lips as I entered, signaling silence. When I drew closer, he leaned forward, voice low. "It will be Mr. Holloway next." Just before sunrise, I felt a chill ripple through me. George Holloway was one of our more stable patients, a 60-year-old with advanced ALS. His breathing was assisted, but his vitals were steady. Earlier that evening, I had suctioned his trach and noted no changes. I asked Reeve gently, "Why do you say that?" "Because I can hear it," he replied, eyes glinting. "It's like a clock ticking, only backwards. Everyone has one, yours too." I forced a smile, not wanting to wake his daughter with panic. "You should rest, Mr. Reeve, it's late." He shook his head slowly. "Rest comes for them, not for me, not yet." I checked on Holloway twice more that night, my hands cold as I touched his arm. At 4:12 a.m., his oxygen levels plummeted. His heart gave out within minutes. Despite our efforts, he was gone by 4:30. The chart said cardiac arrest due to progression of ALS, medically sound, but as I wrote the time of death, I couldn't shake the echo of Reeves' voice. Just before sunrise. When I returned to his room, I found him watching me, calm, unblinking. His daughter still slept, oblivious. "Do you believe me now?" he asked. My throat tightened. "How do you know these things?" He tapped his temple once, then placed his hand flat against his chest. Because when you're this close to the end, the world stops hiding. The veil thins. I hear the tide, nurse. And the tide tells me who it's coming for. I tried to press him further, but he only smiled, laid back, and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep, peaceful, steady, as if he hadn't just foretold another death with chilling precision. By morning, word had spread among the staff. 2 predictions, 2 correct. Jokes circulated nervously. Maybe he's psychic. Maybe he's cursed. But beneath the laughter, I saw the fear in their eyes. That evening, as I prepared medications, my charge nurse Linda pulled me aside. You're his night nurse. If he says anything else, I want to know immediately. We can't let this spook the other patients. I nodded, though inside I already knew the truth. This wasn't just coincidence anymore. By the time I began my 3rd week with Mr. Reeves, his reputation had already spread. Families didn't know the details, but staff whispered in corners, glancing at his door as though he could hear every word. He was calm during the day, polite, cooperative. He ate what little he could, spoke warmly to Emily, listened to the birds outside his window. But at night he became something else. Watchful, waiting, listening to the silence like it carried a message only he could hear. It was a Thursday when he crossed a line I'll never forget. I came into his room for the midnight round, clipboard in hand. Emily had gone home for the night, promising to return in the morning. Mr. Reeves was sitting up again, pale light from the hallway spilling across his face. You work too much, he said suddenly. I smiled faintly. That's hospice life. No, he replied, shaking his head. You should spend more time with your daughter Ellie, isn't it? My chest tightened so sharply I almost dropped the chart. I had never mentioned my daughter to him. Never. Not to patients. Not even to most staff. Her name was mine alone to protect. How do you know that? I asked, voice trembling. He smiled faintly. I told you. Everyone has a clock. I hear it. Yours is quiet now, but hers is bright. She'll live a long time. But the man at the desk, he nodded toward the hallway. His clock is nearly silent. I stepped outside immediately, heart racing, and found Brian, the overnight receptionist, dozing in his chair at the front desk. His color looked off-ashen. I shook him awake, alarmed. Within minutes, he collapsed, clutching his chest. We called 911, started compressions, but it was too late. Massive heart attack. Pronounced dead at 12:42 a.m. The hospice house was chaos for the rest of the night. EMTs rolled a body bag past patient rooms. Staff tried to keep families calm. And still he couldn't shake the image of Mr. Reeves, waiting in his bed, eyes shining in the dim light, as though none of it surprised him. When I confronted him, he only said, "Death doesn't belong to you, or to me. I just hear the footsteps before you do." I wanted to scream, to accuse him of playing God, of tormenting us. But the truth weighed heavier than anger. He hadn't been wrong yet. And in the stillness of that night, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just predicting patients anymore. He was naming us, the staff, the living, and no one, not even me, was safe. After Brian's death, St. Catherine's changed. The building still smelled of lavender and antiseptic. Families still came and went, but the air felt charged, heavy. The staff carried themselves differently, heads lowered, voices hushed as though any words spoken too loudly might summon Reeves' attention. It was no longer a secret. Everyone knew. Nurses avoided his room when possible. Aides whispered, "Don't let him look at you." The receptionist's empty desk became a silent reminder. His chair pushed neatly under the counter as though he'd simply stepped away for a break. The worst part was the waiting. Every night we wondered, who would he name next? That tension finally cracked when Janice, one of our senior aides, refused to work the night shift. "I saw him smile at me," she said, hands shaking as she folded her scrubs. "And I swear I heard my name in my head. Not from his mouth, inside my head." She never returned. 2 days later, Reeves whispered another name. This time he didn't say it to me, he told Linda, our charge nurse. She came to me in the lounge afterward, pale, her voice thin as paper. He told me it's Henry. Henry was a quiet, kind orderly who'd worked there longer than I had. He had no health problems, no obvious signs of decline. But once Linda told me, I couldn't stop watching him, counting his steps, studying his face for pallor. listening to his breathing as though death might announce itself in subtle ways. That night, Henry didn't show for his shift. He was found in his apartment the next morning. Stroke, 47 years old, gone. The hospice staff began unraveling after that. People swapped shifts desperately, calling in sick, handing in resignations. Even the doctors grew hesitant, speaking in clipped tones, eyes darting toward room 7, where Reeves stayed. Through it all, he remained calm, courteous, even kind. He thanked us for water, for meals, for adjusting his blanket. But when the lights dimmed and the halls grew quiet, his eyes would find mine, and I felt the weight of a man who carried truths no one should carry. One evening, as I checked his vitals, he reached out, his thin fingers brushing my wrist. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "It's not a curse. It's a kindness. I tell you so you won't be surprised when the tide comes." I pulled back, shaken. "But why us? Why not just yourself?" His smile faded. "Because death doesn't happen in isolation. It comes in waves. And waves always touch more than one shore." That night I dreamt of water flooding the hospice halls, pouring under doors, rising past the beds. And standing in the center of it, dry and calm, was Alton Reeve, listening to the tide. By August, St. Catherine's was half empty, not because our census was low, but because staff refused to work near room 7. Some nights it felt like I was the only one left who would step inside without trembling. But even I began to dread his voice. The predictions no longer stopped at staff or patients. They spread outward, reaching into the families who came to visit. It started with Mrs. Callahan, who visited her husband every evening, a warm woman in her 60s, always carrying a tote bag of crossword puzzles. She left the building one night smiling, kissed my cheek, told me she'd see me tomorrow. The next morning when she didn't arrive, her daughter called. Mrs. Callahan had died in her sleep aneurysm. When I told Reeve, he only nodded. I told her it was soon. She wanted to know. She thanked me. I felt my stomach twist. "Why would you say something like that to her?" "Because it's crueler not to," he replied softly. I stopped arguing after that. A week later, as I checked his 4-line, he looked at me with those pale eyes and said, "The young boy, in the red jacket. He won't see Friday." I froze. Hours earlier, I had passed a boy in the lobby, a visitor, maybe 10 years old, wearing a bright red windbreaker, as he trailed behind his mother. He'd smiled shyly at me when I held the door. My hands shook as I adjusted the 4. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't say that, not about children." But Reeve only closed his eyes. The tide doesn't care about age. I went home that night praying he was wrong. But Friday morning, as I walked in, Linda met me at the door, her face gray. "Did you hear that boy Andrew? Car accident on Route 8. He and his mother were visiting Mr. Jensen. Neither made it." I stood frozen in the lobby, the antiseptic smell suddenly suffocating. Reeve had never been wrong, not once. By then, the hospice was unraveling. Families whispered about the man who knows. Some sought him out, desperate for answers. I saw visitors lean into his doorway, begging, "When? Please, tell me when." Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he only smiled, as though the question itself were irrelevant. And always his eyes came back to me. One night, as the building settled into silence, he whispered as I passed his door, "You're not ready for what I know about you." I stopped cold. My hand clenched the clipboard so hard the wood cracked, but I didn't step inside. I didn't ask, because deep down I was terrified of hearing my own name fall from his lips. I told myself I could handle it, that as long as I kept my head down, did my rounds, and treated Reeve like any other patient, I could weather his predictions. But then he began talking about my family. It was a quiet Monday night when it happened. Emily had gone home. The halls were dim, and I was charting at the nurse's station. I heard his voice before I saw him steady.com, cutting through the silence. "She's afraid of the dark now, isn't she?" I froze. He was speaking from his room, door ajar. I stepped inside cautiously, clipboard pressed to my chest. "What are you talking about?" "Your daughter," he said, eyes bright in the lamp's glow. "Ellie, she leaves the light on at night, because she dreams of waves rising under her door." My mouth went dry. The night before, Ellie had come into my room crying, begging me not to turn off the hallway light. She'd described a nightmare of black water filling her bedroom. I had never told anyone, not my colleagues, not even my husband. How do you know that? I whispered. He didn't answer directly. He just smiled faintly and said, "The tide touches everyone, nurse. Even the ones you think safe at home." That night, when I returned to my house, I found Ellie's nightlight unplugged, lying on the floor. She swore she hadn't touched it. By morning, I was unraveling. My hands shook during meds. I snapped at Linda over nothing. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked gaunt, pale. The worst came 3 days later. I was adjusting Reeves' blanket when he reached out and grasped my wrist. His touch was icy, far colder than a living man's should be. He leaned close enough that I felt his breath against my ear. "Don't take her across the bridge on Friday." My chest clenched. "What bridge? You'll know," he murmured. Then he let go, eyes drifting shut. For the rest of that week, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I drove slowly, avoided every overpass, clutched Ellie's hand tighter than ever. And Friday night, as we headed home from the grocery store, traffic diverted us toward Riverside Bridge, a narrow steel span across the Hudson. My pulse thundered as I gripped the wheel. Ahead, red taillights glowed. Behind us, horns blared. Halfway across, an 18-wheeler jackknifed on the far side, crashing through the guardrail. Cars skidded, metal shrieked. I slammed the brakes just short of the chaos, Ellie screaming beside me. If we'd left the store 10 minutes earlier, we would have been in the direct path. When I finally got home, shaking, groceries spilled across the kitchen floor, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Reeves wasn't just predicting death. He was steering me away from it. After the bridge, I couldn't see Reeves the same way. Fear mixed with something far more dangerous, dependence. If he knew, if he truly knew, then wasn't it reckless not to listen? I wasn't the only one thinking that. Word spread beyond staff. Families began lingering in the halls, whispering about the old man who can tell. Visitors drifted past room 7, pretending to walk by, but their eyes lingered. Some even stepped inside, asking questions in hushed, desperate voices. At first, Emily tried to turn them away. "Please, he's sick, he needs rest." But Reeves encouraged them. He welcomed their questions like parishioners to a confessional. I walked in one evening to find a young woman clutching his hand, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "Will my father make it through the month?" Reeves' pale eyes studied her, unblinking. 2 weeks, he said simply, "but he won't suffer." She sobbed, kissed his hand, thanked him. And the worst part, she left relieved. The more accurate his predictions, the more people sought him out. Staff stopped trying to intervene. Some even asked themselves, quietly, after shifts, when, how long? The hospice had changed. It no longer felt like a place for easing the dying. It felt like a shrine. Patients and families began to revolve around room 7, as if death itself had taken up residence there, and Reeves was its chosen mouthpiece. I wanted to stop it, to confront him, to end the madness. But every time I opened my mouth, the words died in my throat. Because I remembered the bridge. I remembered Ellie's small hand clutching mine, alive because of what he'd whispered. One night, I asked him directly, "Why are you doing this? Why tell people things they shouldn't know?" He smiled faintly. "Because truth is kinder than lies. And because the tide doesn't wait for silence." I shook my head, trembling. "But you're scaring them." "No," he corrected softly. "I'm preparing them." That night I dreamed of walking the hospice halls. Every room filled not with patients but with waves, rolling black water pressing against the glass. And at the center of it, standing dry and calm, was Alton Reeves, his hand raised not in warning, but in welcome. When I woke sweat-soaked, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't afraid of his predictions anymore. I was afraid of how much I wanted to hear mine. It was late September when I realized Reeves' words were no longer just predictions. They were declarations, sentences. It began with Clara, a frail woman in her 90s with advanced dementia. Her daughter sat at her bedside daily, knitting, whispering prayers. One afternoon, as I passed by room 7, I overheard Reeves' voice. "Tomorrow night, just before midnight." I froze. He was speaking to Clara's daughter. She gasped, then thanked him as if he'd given her a gift. Clara passed the next night 11:52 p.m. I signed the chart with shaking hands, bile rising in my throat. But what struck me most was Reeves' calm. Not surprise, not grief. Just satisfaction, as though the tide had arrived exactly on schedule. After that, families stopped asking if they asked when, and he always answered, always precise, always right. The hospice transformed. Staff avoided the halls after dark. Families clustered outside room 7, waiting for his verdicts. The air grew thick with resignation. Death no longer came quietly, it came, announced. One night I entered his room to administer medication. He watched me with those silver eyes, expression unreadable. "You think I'm cruel," he said. I didn't respond. "But cruelty is silence," he continued. "Imagine if no one told you the tide was rising, and you drowned unprepared. I give them time to breathe before the water takes them." I wanted to argue, to scream that he was poisoning this place, turning hospice into a theater of dread. But his gaze held me, unblinking, and I faltered. Then his lips curved faintly. "You still haven't asked about yourself." My heart thundered. My tongue felt leaden. I left without answering, but the question lingered in my skull like a parasite. The following week, the hospice director tried to intervene. She called a meeting, insisted Reeves' behavior was destabilizing the staff and families. "He's delusional," she said firmly. "We must treat his words as symptoms, nothing more." The next morning she was found in her office, slumped over her desk. Stroke, time of death, 6:17 a.m. When I passed Reeves' room, his eyes were open, watching the doorway. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His silence told me everything. That night, for the first time, I didn't dream of waves. I dreamed of clocks. Hundreds of clocks, ticking in unison, each one slowing, one by one, until only mine still moved. And behind me I felt him watching. I had avoided it for weeks, but I knew it was coming. Every night I lingered outside room 7, clipboard clutched to my chest, praying he wouldn't call to me. But one night in October, as the hallway settled into silence, his voice slid through the door like a knife. "Come in, nurse. It's time." I hesitated, heart pounding, before stepping inside. He was awake, propped against his pillows, lamp casting shadows over his gaunt face. Emily slept in the recliner, her breathing soft and steady. "You've given me so much," he whispered. "Care, patience, trust. But you've been waiting, haven't you? Waiting to know." My throat tightened. "Don't." His pale eyes gleamed. "I hear your clock louder than anyone's. It doesn't frighten me. It shouldn't frighten you." I shook my head, tears stinging. "Please, don't say it. I don't want to know." He smiled faintly, tilting his head. "Everyone thinks that, until I tell them. And then, even when they weep, some part of them is relieved. Because there's nothing worse than the not knowing." I backed toward the door, pulse hammering, when he spoke my name. Not my title, not nurse. My full name, first and last. The sound of it in his rasping voice made the air go still. And then he said the date. The exact date. It wasn't soon, months away, but hearing it knocked the breath from my chest. My knees nearly buckled. I shook my head violently. "No, you're wrong. You have to be wrong." But he only leaned back against the pillows, eyes closing, lips curling in that faint, maddening smile. For the rest of the night, I couldn't chart, couldn't focus. My hands trembled with every syringe, every line I signed. His voice echoed in my skull. The date, the date, the date. I went home at dawn, collapsed into my bed, and stared at the ceiling. My daughter Ellie stirred in the next room, murmuring in her sleep. I wanted to run to her, hold her, promise her I wasn't going anywhere. But his words had poisoned me, because no matter how hard I tried to push them away, deep down, I believed him. After that night, I couldn't escape it. The date sat in my mind like a tumor, growing, pressing, poisoning every thought. At work, I found myself staring at calendars, counting down weeks, days, hours. Every tick of the clock on the nurse's station wall echoed like a countdown to execution. I tried to dismiss it, medicalize it. It's suggestion, I told myself. The power of belief. If you think about death long enough, you start to feel it breathing on your neck. But then I'd remember Mrs. Daniels, Mr. Holloway, Brian at the desk, Clara, the boy in the red jacket. All of them foretold, all of them gone, exactly as he said. If he'd been right every time, Why would he be wrong now? I became paranoid. I checked my vitals daily, monitored my diet, drove like an old woman on ice. I stopped crossing bridges, avoided highways. Still, the date loomed, immovable. Ellie noticed. Children always notice. One night she climbed onto my lap, her little brow furrowed. "Mommy, why do you look so scared all the time?" I forced a smile. "I'm not scared, sweetheart." But she shook her head, frowning. "You smell scared." Her words gutted me. At St. Catherine's, Reeves grew weaker, but his presence only deepened. Families sought him out daily. Some begged, some bargained, some left sobbing. Emily tried to protect him, but he seemed to draw strength from their fear. His body wasted away, yet his eyes burned brighter. One night I confronted him. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Why me?" I demanded, fists clenched. "Why tell me? Why put this weight on me?" His smile was almost tender. "Because you've listened longer than anyone. And because you'll need to be ready. It's not an ending, nurse. It's a crossing." "A crossing to what?" I snapped. His gaze softened, almost pitying. "You'll see." I left his room trembling, bile in my throat. For the first time I considered quitting. Leaving St. Catherine's, moving states, hiding from him and his cursed knowledge. But the truth gnawed at me. It didn't matter where I went. He had named me. He had stamped me with the tide, and tides follow. That night I dreamed again of water filling the hospice halls. But this time the water wasn't dark. It was clear, endless, and rising fast. And in the reflection on its surface, I saw myself not drowning, but walking, hand in hand with Ellie, into waves that reached no shore. By December, the hospice no longer felt like a place of peace. It felt like a morgue with waiting rooms. Every ticking clock, every whispered prayer, every shuffle of feet in the hall carried the weight of Reeves' sentences. And my date was closing in. I tried to keep working, tried to lose myself in routine, charting vitals, adjusting morphine drips, comforting families. But no matter where I turned, I felt the pull of his gaze from room 7. I avoided him as best I could, but sometimes I'd feel him watching as I passed his door, like a spider monitoring its web. Emily cornered me one night during a shift change. Her eyes were hollow, her voice tired. "He said something to you, didn't he?" I froze. "I can tell." She pressed. "You're walking like the others did, with the weight on your back." Tears stung my eyes. I couldn't lie. I just nodded. Emily's lips trembled. "I wish I could say he's wrong, but he never is." She looked down, twisting her wedding band. "I thought being his wife would shield me, that he wouldn't mark me, but he did." Her voice broke on the last words. I wanted to comfort her, but the terror inside me was too great. Instead, I just walked away cowardly. The nights bled together. I grew hyper-aware of syntax in my chest, skipped heartbeats, fleeting shadows. Every little pain felt like an omen. I found myself writing letters to Ellie, hiding them in her dresser. One for her 10th birthday, one for her graduation, one for her wedding. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. One evening, as a storm raged outside, I sat at the nurse's station long after rounds were done. The power flickered, thunder rattling the glass. And then, in the silence between strikes, I heard his voice, not from down the hall, from inside my head. "Soon." I dropped my pen, heart racing. The hallway was empty. His door was closed, but the word lingered, curling through my skull like smoke. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by Ellie's bed, holding her hand, watching her chest rise and fall, terrified of closing my eyes. Because for the first time, I wondered if death wouldn't come in the hospice at all. Maybe it would follow me home. The date circled my calendar like a brand. Each day I crossed off brought me closer to it, my pulse quickening with every X. When it finally arrived, I couldn't bring myself to work. I called in sick, though the truth was I sat in my living room staring at the clock, unable to move. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and Ellie humming to her dolls in the next room. The hours dragged. Every sound was amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the rattle of the wind, my own shallow breath. Noon passed. Then evening, my dread only sharpened. At 11 p.m., my chest tightened. I clutched at it, convinced this was it. Heart attack, stroke, something final. I stumbled into the hallway, sweat slicking my face, Vision tunneling. Ellie appeared in her doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy?" Her small voice cut through the haze. I collapsed to my knees, arms wrapping around her as sobs tore free. If I was going to die, I wanted her last memory to be of me holding her. But then midnight struck, and nothing happened. No lightning, no collapse, no final breath, just silence. Slowly my pulse steadied, my breathing eased. I was alive. I laughed, hysterical, broken, but alive. I kissed Ellie's forehead a dozen times, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I thought maybe, finally, the curse had broken. The next morning, I drove to St. Catherine's. I needed to see him, needed to throw his lie back in his face. I stormed down the hall toward room 7, but the bed was empty. Emily stood there, tears in her eyes, clutching his wedding band in her fist. "He passed just after midnight," she whispered. The words hollowed me. Midnight. The very moment I'd been waiting for. He hadn't foretold my death. He'd foretold his own. I staggered back, dizzy with realization. For months, I'd carried the weight of his sentence like a shroud, reshaping my life, poisoning every moment with fear. And all along, it had been his clock ticking down. Emily placed the ring in my hand. "He wanted you to have this," she said softly. I stared at the band, cold and heavy, wondering if it was a gift or a chain. That night, when I finally slept, I dreamed not of waves or clocks, but of silence. A silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums until I woke gasping. On my dresser, the ring gleamed faintly in the dark, and in that moment, I realized something that froze me to the marrow. He hadn't been wrong. He had only delayed me.